I had been married to Blake Wilson for 5 years, and in those 5 years, it seemed like every few days, a new woman was paraded through our door. Each time, I would listen to the sounds of their passion filling the next room, marking it down in my memo. 5 years and 98 times. Today, it was a fresh-faced, delicate college student. Once they were done, Blake called for me to come in and clean up. Kendall Davis lay lazily in his arms, a teasing smile playing on her lips as she spoke. Blake, is this the old, ugly wife you mentioned? The one who can't even stir the slightest bit of desire? Blake idly ran his fingers through Kendall's hair, offering nothing more than a dismissive grunt. Kendall tossed the blanket aside, her skin marked with fresh hickeys, her grin wide. See, this is how a man reacts to a young, beautiful woman. As a woman, you really failed. I stayed silent, my gaze fixed on the floor, as I quietly cleaned up the mess. Their laughter echoed through the room, a cruel reminder of the silence that surrounded me. Once I retreated to my room, I pulled out the divorce agreement from the safe. 5 years had passed, and in all that time, it felt as though I had forgotten Blake and I were only bound by a contract. 1 week, just one more week, and the divorce would be final. The next morning, I woke early, as I always did. Blake had already called me 3 times, demanding breakfast in his bedroom. Without a second thought, I refused. Don't you have hands or feet? Should I feed you bite by bite? I ended the call just as Blake stormed into the room, his finger jabbing at me. Laura, who are you throwing a tantrum at? Don't forget whose house you're in, and who you're talking to. I didn't respond. Instead, I lifted my eyes to meet his, studying the face I'd once known so well, a face I had loved. I knew he had never loved me, but the sting came from realizing that, for 5 years, he had never truly seen me as a part of his life. Finally, I lowered my gaze, my voice soft but firm. I'll leave this house sooner or later. His anger flared, his voice rising. Leave this house? You've been living off me all this time. How will you survive when you're gone? Before I could reply, Kendall's voice cut through the tension, lazy and dripping with sarcasm. Oh, the old woman's throwing a tantrum again? What's wrong? Getting old and can't bear seeing Blake with younger, prettier women? If it bothers you so much, why don't you just strip off your clothes and crawl into Blake's bed? But, she laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. With that face, no man would even blink. I slammed the spoon down onto the table, the sound sharp and sudden, like a match sparking something deep inside me. Blake, who had been standing nearby, scoffed. Did Kendall say something wrong? Are you throwing another tantrum? I pressed my lips together, silently clearing away the half-eaten cereal before heading toward the kitchen. Kendall's triumphant voice floated from the dining room. This is too good. Just stay obedient and play your part as the old housewife. Enough, stop talking. Blake's tone was scolding, but I could hear the underlying indulgence in his words. I stared at the faucet, my thoughts drifting like a fog, so much so that I almost let the water overflow. Then, a hand reached from behind and turned off the faucet. What are you lost in? The voice was too close, and when I turned, I found myself trapped in Blake's intense, unreadable gaze. I lowered my head again, focusing on the dishes in front of me. It's nothing. I was just thinking about what comes next, after the divorce. Divorce? Blake's voice was laced with amusement, as if I'd just told him a joke. You've been with me since college, playing the dutiful housewife for 5 years. You've been cut off from the world. After we part ways, what will you even do? Housekeeper? Or just a maid cleaning up after everyone else? Those words, sharp and cruel, echoed in my mind, a refrain I had grown all too familiar with. At first, they stung, cutting through me like a sharp blade. I found myself questioning, doubting if I really was as worthless as they painted me to be. But 5 years ago, I was just as young and radiant as Kendall. 5 years ago, my world had shattered. In an instant, my parents were ripped from me in a tragic accident, leaving only me and my 10-year-old brother battling leukemia. Desperation had taken root in me, and there was no choice but to drop out of school. I juggled part-time jobs, anything to afford his treatment. The quickest way to earn money? A nightclub, where I ended up as an escort. When a client humiliated me, a bottle crashing into my forehead, I thought I'd reached the bottom. But then, a hand reached down from the darkness, pulling me out. That was the first time I met Blake. He had appeared like an angel in my life, lifting me from the flames of my misery. And in that moment, he offered me a lifeline, an unexpected marriage contract. $5 million in exchange for 5 years of my life. I agreed. He said he needed a wife to quiet his family's expectations, someone with a spotless past, and that he didn't want me out in public often, only allowing me to go out twice a week. I agreed. So, I spent those 5 years almost entirely inside this grand mansion. As for Blake, I thought I loved him. I accepted this imprisonment, and, oddly, I even found a strange comfort in it. I truly believed I could be his wife forever, but he never touched me, never allowed me into his inner world. Then, one day, when he wasn't home, I couldn't fight the temptation any longer. I sneaked into his bedroom, and that's when the truth hit me like a slap in the face. Blake had always had a lover, Kendall, his 5 years younger neighbor. I had long grown numb to Blake's endless parade of women. To me, they were nothing more than fleeting distractions, mere tools to satisfy his desires. And I, in my quiet submission, held on to the title of Mrs. Wilson as if it were a badge of honor. But yesterday changed everything. The moment I saw Kendall stroll into that bedroom, the one I had never been allowed to set foot in for 5 years, it hit me like a jolt of electricity. I finally understood. It was time to leave. Laura? Blake's voice sliced through my thoughts, thick with impatience. What's going on in that head of yours? You called me useless, right? I replied coolly, turning to face him. Maybe it's time I find a job. A housekeeper, a maid. I paused, locking eyes with him. 5 years. I haven't broken any laws. Should I just waste away here forever? Blake opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Kendall stepped out, sliding into a pristine, brand new couture dress. It was the same dress Blake had kept locked away, never worn, waiting for the right moment. And now it was on Kendall. I didn't expect you to know my size so well, she purred, whirling in front of him. The fabric swirled gracefully around her, her smile gleaming. Do you think it looks good? Blake took Kendall's hand, his usual indifference replaced by something soft, almost affectionate. They look amazing, he said, nodding. As long as you love them, I'll buy you anything. And then, right there in front of me, they kissed. Kendall, her cheeks tinged with a hint of shyness, reluctantly pulled away from Blake. There are others here, she murmured, her eyes briefly briefly flickering to me. Do you think the dress Blake chose for me looks good? The dress clung to Kendall's form, a shimmering fabric that wrapped around her like it had been made for her, luxurious, radiant, and perfectly suited to her youthful charm. I nodded. My voice was soft yet genuine as I met her gaze. Kendall froze, momentarily caught off guard by my words. She stood there, her gaze flickering as if weighing my intent. Blake's brows furrowed, though his expression remained as unreadable as ever. Seizing the chance, I silently slipped away from the kitchen, feeling a sense of liberation with each step I took. The divorce agreement would take effect in a week, and I had only that precious time to pack my life and leave this place behind. Back in the bedroom, I scrolled through rental listings on my phone, absorbed in my thoughts, when Blake's voice cut through the air. I need to head to the company for a bit. Kendall will stay here, so you'll take care of her. I raised an eyebrow, a confusion creeping into my tone. Am I now a housekeeper? Is she so helpless that she needs me to babysit her? I had always bowed to his commands without a second thought, but today, something had shifted in me. I found myself questioning him, challenging his authority with every word. His face darkened, his voice dropping low and menacing. Laura, don't forget who's been keeping you. You're here because of me, and you'll do as I say. Don't push me. I swallowed the bitter taste of my pride, nodding with reluctant compliance, the weight of his words pressing heavily on my chest. Before leaving, Blake issued one last warning, his voice low and edged with authority. Kendall's young. You're responsible for her while I'm gone. If anything happens, don't think I'll let you off easy. With those words lingering in the air, Blake leaned down to kiss Kendall's forehead, a tender, possessive gesture before he strode out, the sound of the door clicking shut reverberating in the silence. Now, with only Kendall and me left in the living room, the atmosphere shifted. She slouched against the sofa, a mischievous smile tugging at her lips. I heard you've been married to Blake for 5 years, she said, her voice thick with amusement. Yes, I replied, my tone calm and measured, betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside me. But last night, he told me he's never touched you. Kendall's posture shifted as she tossed her hair back, revealing the dark mark on her neck. You must be 26 by now, still a virgin. Her words hung in the air, sharp and probing. She giggled, swaying gracefully like a delicate flower, before continuing. You must have heard us last night, right? Blake is such a tease. He made sure you could hear everything from the next room. Oh, and I almost forgot. You've never experienced a man, have you? Especially someone as strong as Blake. Her laughter was almost too much to bear. What a shame. At your age, I doubt anyone would touch you, except for maybe you chasing after them, right? I furrowed my brows, disbelief creeping into my thoughts. I hadn't expected Blake's hidden rose to speak with such venom. Calmly, I answered, everyone lives their life differently. I don't base my existence on any man. Kendall's laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a sneer. A woman who's been living off a man, playing housewife for 5 years, probably has no room to talk, huh? I chose not to engage further, sitting down on the opposite end of the sofa as I continued my search for a place to rent. Kendall couldn't stand the sight of me remaining so calm and composed. It didn't take long for her to start pushing my buttons, trying to boss me around. The last time, she complained that the coffee I made was too cold and demanded I pour boiling water to fix it. Then, with the slyest of smiles, she pretended to spill it. Most of the water splashed onto me while just a few drops landed on her wrist. Her cry echoed through the room, sharp and dramatic. Blake, it hurts so much. By the time Blake rushed in, his face twisted in alarm. Kendall was already in full meltdown mode. She showed him the small burn on her wrist, and he fussed over it for a moment before turning to me, his anger flaring. With a forceful slap, he sent me crashing to the ground. Didn't I tell you to take care of Kendall? Is this how you do it? His voice was cold with fury. If even the smallest mark appears on her, I'll make sure you suffer 10 times worse. Without another word, Blake grabbed Kendall and rushed her off to the hospital, leaving me kneeling on the floor. I lifted my nightgown, the red welts on my thighs already burning with the sting of the water. They're stunning.